Good howdy everybody. Today we're going to be covering the MPS7 Outer Space. It is a very powerful zappy weapon that will absolutely shock you. Anyway, in this video we're going to go over the following: the weapon itself, the armor and mods, the high HP and low HP version, the Cradle buffs, the deviations, and the food buffs. There's going to be timestamps in the description for each section for easy navigation, and if you find any of this helpful, please consider subscribing. Let's get right into it. Let's go over what the MP7 Outer Space does. This gun has a natural 30% chance to trigger Power Surge on hit. When you hit a target affected by Power Surge 12 times, it summons a big ol' lightning bolt, does 300% psi intensity damage. Fun fact, at the time of recording they actually just buffed this and now it does 500%, not 300%, which means it is substantially stronger. Which means the gear stars on your armor is very important combined with the calibration. After you reload, Power Surge trigger chance increases by 40%, so it'll give you a 70% chance to trigger Power Surge, in addition to a flat 30% increase in your shock elemental damage, which is a lot. For my calibration, I prefer to use heavy style double elemental. More magazine capacity means more zaps, means more big bang bada kabooms per magazine. For my mod, I'm using static shock Power Surge, so this will give me reduced duration but more damage. With how fast this gun shoots, you don't have to worry about the duration being lower because you're still just going to constantly pump out Power Surges. Now the Power Surge affixes that I'm looking for are Power Surge damage on targets with Power Surge. These are your two go-tos. They're separate buckets of damage, so they multiply on each other in a different way, which makes them exponentially more powerful. It's a whole thing. We're not here to do math. We're here to be strong. That's what matters. Now, suffix mods themselves, we'll talk a little bit later about how to get those, but those are by far your go-to. They're the strongest. My secondary, I'm using Wildfire because I like how it sounds. It's chunky. If you don't want to use Wildfire, you can also use Bingo. Again, I just prefer Wildfire because I'm used to it. The mod that I'm using on the Wildfire is Vulnerability Amplifier because it amplifies our vulnerable damage. For my melee weapon, I stay using the Kukri. That hasn't changed. That's never going to change. It gives you increased attack. So attack up means all damage increase. All of your damage goes up by 30%. So I always carry ice blocks. I always carry Kukri. I'm always dealing 30% more damage. It is a tremendous difference. Not required, but very highly recommended. I actually am using a mod on it for once. For the first time in my life, I'm using Melee Amplifier because I learned that it actually matters. This tiny bit of damage given to you by Melee Amplifier makes it so that you one-shot the ice blocks. It is... I didn't know this. I feel stupid all this time. I haven't been using it. Use it, by the way. Don't be like me. Well, now you can be like me. Don't be like old me. Old me didn't understand. New me does. New me gets it. New me's here. Also, if you ever run out of ice pots, just go over to a Kurd CX's house and go steal them. That's what I do. It's easier. Welcome to the high HP version of the MP7 Outer Space. The high HP version of this build, in my opinion, is unique from the other versions of this. So the high HP version still does a tremendous amount of damage. Just by nature of the weapon, it does status and elemental damage. Nothing changes there. We change out our mods, so that way they're all not low HP lunar versions of the mods. And we also change our chest piece to now have a damage increasing mod instead of having a defensive mod, which you need desperately when you're low HP. So how do these mods change? On the mask, I'm now using Deviation Expert Talents. I'm using my Power Surge Thunderclap, but I'm using Flame Resonance now, a blue mod that will give me increased damage. I'm using a Talents Elemental Resonance. As I deal elemental damage, I do more. I'm using a status enhancement on my gloves. That doesn't change, but now I'm using Covered Advance. So when I don't take damage, I deal more damage. It's very nice. But how does the armor change? You always use Treacherous Ties for low HP. So when you have high HP, you want to use 4 pieces of Shelterer. This is going to give you up to 20% increased elemental damage as your bullets hit. When you have the 4-piece, it gives you an extra 10 stacks, which is an extra 10% elemental damage. Now, it's difficult to figure out what to pair this with for your last item, but I tend to use Bastille Pants because at the end of the day, your gun still shoots bullets. Therefore, it does weapon damage. 10% more is just 10% more. Everything else is generally more of a healing or a speed buff. Give me more damage. To supplement the fact that our health is higher, we need our gun to counterbalance the fact that we're not getting as much damage because we're higher HP. Moving on now. Welcome into the low HP version of the MP7 Outer Space. The armor in the low HP version still is going to consist of the Mayfly goggles. Those are our go-to key item. That's not going to change. We're using 3 pieces of Treacherous Tides because in any good low HP build, Treacherous Tides keeps you alive and gives you a tremendous amount of hybrid damage, both weapon and status, which is exactly what we need for this build. Now, typically, people would use either Shelter or Blackstone based on what type of damage you're dealing. I personally opt with Blackstone because this gives you up to 10% increased elemental damage damage. And since it triggers every single time you deal elemental damage, you're able to stack up to that 5 stacks very quickly, specifically with this gun. It's more than the shelter set. The 2-piece shelter will give you 8%. The 2-piece blackstone will give you 2% damage. It's min-maxing, yes, but this is a sweaty build for a reason. We are going to sweat. The mods that I'm using for my low HP version are Lunar Deviation Expert, focusing on status damage and elemental damage. I'm still using my Power Surge Thunderclap mod. I'll talk about how to get Power Surge specific mods later. This one is focusing Power Surge damage and damage on targets with Power Surge. On my chest piece, I'm using Ardent Shield. This is my strongest lunar mod with status and elemental damage, but this also gives me damage reduction, which is really useful for being a low HP build. On my pants, I'm using Elemental Resonance. For every instance of elemental damage done, reload to get more. This means all of your damage does not come from your first magazine, but from your second magazine. So that's when the damage really, really ramps up, but it already outputs so much, it's insane. On my gloves, I'm using a Talent's Status Enhancement to give me elemental damage and status damage. This one I got lucky with, and it also rolled magazine capacity and damage against normal enemies, which is really powerful for dungeons. On my boots, I'm using Rush Hour. Low HP means more damage. Again, talents focusing on elemental damage and status damage. Happening to roll more normal damage is amazing. And then weapon damage reduction will be useful against things like Rosetta soldiers if you're going through the bridge, silo, or anywhere that you're fighting Rosetta-based enemies. Moving on to our Cradle. We are using Anti-Phase because this raises our SMG damage. The Outer Space is an SMG, therefore we deal more damage. Rapid Aid to aid ourselves rapidly when our health is low. Status Enhancement to enhance our status damage. Elemental Sense to sense where to do more elemental damage. Transient Impact because Power Surge damage up is good. Deviant Energy Defense. When I summon the Deviation, I gain a shield and therefore I get to live. Tactical Combo. We reload. We deal damage when we reload. There's no other real status damage buff to use, so it just works. We reload pretty often. Everything comes in after the reload, so it just kind of makes sense to use. You can use shield protection, which is good, but you don't really generate enough shield for that to really matter. And another secondary that you could use is Marked Strike to increase weak spot damage, but honestly, the reload one just is better overall, in my opinion, less situational, which is nice. Resilience. The shield we do have takes less bonk damage. And that's it for our Cradle. Moving along now to our Deviation. We're using one of the new ones. They just came out with 4 new deviations, but the only one that we're going to look at today is the Zapamander. The Zapamander is extraordinarily powerful. Why did this change? What happened here? Hold on a second. What? So Zapamander is a very powerful new lightning deviation, which they did not have before. It specifically affects Power Surge. You can trust me when I tell you that this text right here previously said increases Power Surge damage dealt to targets by XYZ%. In this case, 32.4 is what it tells me, with a skill rating of 3, which means it can go up tremendously higher if we are using something with a skill rating of 5. I also got a really good trait called Psychic Kid, which will give me an extra 5% status damage when this deviation is fighting alongside you, which is really, really powerful. There is one other deviation that you can use, should you so choose to, and that deviation, hold please, is the Mini Feaster, Starfall Inversion, specifically, because this gives you 5% status damage. When airborne, it gives you more, but we're not worried about that. So the Mini Feaster will give you 20% increased status damage up to 80%, but it takes 4 seconds to ramp up, which means by the time you've ramped up your damage, you're already going to have done so much using the gun itself that you're not getting the full effect. It also applies from a different bucket. So the status damage bucket is different from increased Power Surge damage bucket. And the way that it multiplies, it is better to get the Power Surge damage bucket versus the status damage bucket. And that's about it for deviations. Not too much more to go over there. I prefer the Zapamander. Not only is it shiny and new, gives me more immediate damage and also increases damage out of the correct slot. Bucket. For our food buffs, there's actually some interesting interactions that happen here. So I think you'll be pretty intrigued by how this goes. Naturally, you want to use Whimsical Drink to gain increased status damage. If you have a fully buffed Whimsical Drink, it'll do this much damage, which is obscene. We want to also use Sparkling Pumpkin Soup, which this counts as a drink buff, not a food buff. So you can stack this with a Whimsical Drink, which will give you enhanced Power Surge damage, which is obscenely powerful because we can combine it with Surprise Spring Roll that will enhance our elemental damage by this much, doubling as our HP is below 40. And then we can also still combine that with something like Mixed Fried Hot Dog to give us this much increased damage versus enemies that are affected by the bullseye, or even bone-in deviated sausage to raise our damage against bosses. That's also very effective. That's about it for the food buffs. I'm not sure of any other ones that you would want to use. It has no real bearing on weapon damage, so you really just want to stack your status and elemental damage as much as physically possible. Bonus damage against bullseye targets is really impressive. Thank you for watching, everybody, and I hope you're able to see just how powerful this weapon truly is. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps out the channel tremendously. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see next. We are streaming live on Twitch every day except Wednesday. It is a stinky doo-doo day. Come hang out. And as always, the bathhouse provides.